The spoon clattered. The bowl shattered. He stood. I backed away. "Salt?" he snapped. "You forgot the damn salt?" Then came the slap. Hard. Sharp. My head hit the fridge. The pot flew next. Boiling. He kicked me chain. I hit the floor. And as he loomed over me, fists clenched, eyes wild, I whispered, "This isn't my son." End quote. But was it? How does soup lead to this? What pushed him over the edge? Or had he been this monster all along? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying AMEN below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. I used to think that old age would bring peace. That one day, when the children were grown and the bills were paid, I'd be able to sit in my kitchen with a cup of warm tea, watching the birds outside my window, maybe listening to the radio, and feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. That's what I believed for most of my life. After working 40 years as a legal secretary, raising my son alone after his father walked out on us, I thought I had earned that peace. But last night, my own son hit me until I bled over a bowl of unsalted soup. I'm 70 years old. My body isn't as strong as it once was, but I still get up every morning at 5, like I always have. I still tie my apron around my waist, shuffle into the kitchen with stiff knees, and cook breakfast for the man who used to call me Mommy with eyes full of wonder. Now, he barely looks at me. Yesterday, he sat in his usual seat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone in his expensive charcoal suit. "Breakfast," he snapped without lifting his head. "I've got an important meeting." There was no apology, no mention of the night before, no acknowledgement that he had thrown a bowl of hot soup in my face, slammed me into the kitchen tiles, called me worthless, and left me bleeding on the floor. I wiped the blood with an old dish rag. My lip was split, my cheek stung from the soup, and my arm throbbed where he had grabbed it. But what hurt more than anything was the humiliation. The deep, crushing realization that my son, my only child, no longer saw me as his mother. I was his maid, his cook, his punching bag. I made his scrambled eggs just the way he likes them, 3 spoonfuls of cheddar, 2 slices of toast, black coffee with no sugar. Everything had to be perfect. Because if anything is even slightly off, he explodes. And when Grant explodes, it's always me who pays. While he was eating, Lila walked in, his wife. She floated in like a queen in a pale green dress and heels that clicked loudly across the tile. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," she said in her sugary voice, the one she only uses when Grant's in the room. I smiled back, the way I always do, though my lip was still swollen and my stomach churned. "I'm fine, thank you," I told her. I wanted to scream, to tell her what her husband had done to me just hours before, but I didn't. Because I've learned what happens when I speak. Grant looked up from his plate, smiled with that fake, public smile of his, and said, "Look, Mom, I bought you some new makeup. Should help cover those scrapes from when you tripped last night." Tripped. That's what he called it. The foundation he handed me was expensive, $50 at least. I have no idea where he got the money. Probably from my retirement account. He controls it all. Says I'm too old to handle my finances, that it's for my own good. But I haven't seen a single penny of my pension in nearly 2 years. After breakfast, he leaned in close and whispered, "Remember what we talked about. If you ever open your mouth, you'll regret it. Nobody's going to believe a crazy old woman living off her son's charity." They left together hand in hand, like the perfect couple they pretend to be. I stood at the window and watched them drive away in that gleaming black car, paid for, of course, with my money. And then, I sat in the silence. I sat at the kitchen table where I had bled the night before. I sat and I cried not because of the pain, but because I didn't know what to do anymore. I've given my life to this boy. I gave up promotions, vacations, friendships, everything just to give him a better life. And this is what I've become. A prisoner in the house I bought, living in fear of my own child. The worst part? I don't even recognize myself anymore. I look in the mirror and see a stranger with a bruised cheek and tired eyes. A woman who used to be sharp, organized, respected. Now, I flinch at every footstep, every raised voice. My home has become a battlefield, and I'm always on the losing side. But today, something is different. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the way the morning light hits the table. Or maybe it's the small, sharp ember inside me that refuses to die, no matter how many times it's been stomped on. I don't know what's going to happen next. But I know one thing. I cannot live like this anymore. They say abuse doesn't start with fists, it starts with silence, with the things you choose not to say. The first time Grant raised his voice at me, I told myself he was just having a bad day. When he started taking over my bank account, I convinced myself he was trying to help. When he slammed a door hard enough to rattle the china cabinet, I chalked it up to stress. But looking back now, I realized that the first time he crossed the line wasn't with words or money. It was with a look. It happened 3 years ago, just after his first divorce. He showed up at my doorstep in the middle of a rainy October night with nothing but a suitcase and that pitiful, broken boy expression I'd seen 100 times when he was little. "Mom," he said, soaked to the bone, "I've got nowhere else to go." Of course I let him in. I made him tea, set up the guest room, told him to stay as long as he needed. "This is your home too," I said, and I meant it. For the first few months, things were fine. Almost pleasant. We had dinners together again. He even helped me bring in the groceries. I thought maybe this was the blessing in disguise I'd been praying for, the chance to reconnect with my son as two adults, to finally have the relationship we'd missed when he was younger and I was always working. But then came the comments. "Mom, this lasagna's a little dry. Don't you think the living room smells old? Are you seriously going out in that blouse?" They were little things, barely worth mentioning. But there was a sharpness in his tone, a quiet disgust, and always that look like I was a burden he'd suddenly remembered he had to carry. Then came Lila. She arrived like a storm, all perfume and ambition, 29 years old and already talking about wedding venues before the first month was over. They met at his job. She was in marketing, pretty, well-spoken, and as cold as a marble countertop. They moved fast. By the end of 6 months, she had moved in. By the end of 9, they were married in a lavish ceremony at a vineyard outside Charleston. It cost over $100,000. Every penny of it came from my accounts. When I asked Grant where the money came from, he said, "It's all taken care of, Mom. You worry too much." I didn't even realize what was happening until my pension stopped appearing in my account. When I asked him, his voice changed. "I told you I'd handle the money. You don't need to concern yourself with all that anymore." That was the first time he grabbed my wrist. It wasn't violent, not really, just firm, a warning. "Don't ask again," he said. After that, he started giving me an allowance, $20 a week. "For essentials," he said. Essentials. As if I were a child. As if the money I had worked for, saved for, belonged to him now by default. The violence crept in slowly. A shove here. A tight grip there. Slaps that came faster than my mind could process. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the apologies that followed. He always looked so sincere afterward. "I just get so frustrated, Mom. It's not your fault. I wish you'd take better care of things." And each time, I believed him. Because I wanted to. Because the idea that my son had turned into a monster was too much for my heart to accept. Last year, I had a fall. Not one of the fake ones I used as an excuse. A real one. I was carrying a laundry basket down the stairs, and my knee gave out. I cracked 2 ribs and lay at the bottom of the staircase for hours because Grant had taken my phone to keep me from wasting time on the internet. When Lila came home and found me, she called 911 and then blamed me for scaring them. Grant told the paramedics I was clumsy, that I had a history of falls. I saw one of them glance at my bruises and then look away. After that, Grant installed cameras in the house. "For your safety," he said. But I knew better. Every move I made was watched. Every conversation was monitored. The only room without a camera was the bathroom, and even that, I wasn't completely sure about. One night, about 6 months ago, I tried to call my sister Marilyn. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since our falling out over her moving to Boston and abandoning me here with all the family duties. But that night, I felt desperate. I needed to hear a familiar voice, Before I could finish dialing, Grant came storming into the kitchen. He had seen me on the camera. "What are you doing?" he asked, snatching the phone. "Just calling Marilyn," I said. He stared at me for a long time, then smiled. "You're not as sneaky as you think, Mom." He didn't hit me that night. But the next morning, I found all my contacts deleted from the phone. My address book, my emails gone. My world was shrinking by the day, and I couldn't stop it. And then, last night happened. I'd made vegetable soup. That was our Tuesday tradition, something light. I forgot the salt. That's all. I simply forgot the salt. He stood up, threw the bowl at me, and the world exploded into hot, sharp pain. My lips split. The ceramic shattered. My arm hit the counter and then the floor. I didn't even cry out. I think something inside me broke then. Not just my body, but something deeper. Something final. He walked away after that. Went upstairs. Slept like a baby. And me? I stayed in the kitchen, wiping soup and blood off the floor until the sun came up. This morning, he was back to normal. Calm. Cold. Distant. As I was setting his breakfast down, the front door creaked open. Ruthie, my neighbor, stepped into the yard to retrieve her newspaper. Our eyes met. She gave me a small wave, but I hesitated to return it. I didn't want her to see my face. But she saw. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, and she tilted her head. I saw it in her expression. Something had shifted. Maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. Maybe someone was watching after all. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone. It was the way Ruthie looked at me that morning, just a second too long, with her lips slightly parted and her hand frozen in midair, clutching the rolled-up newspaper that made me realize something had shifted. She saw me. Not just saw me standing there on the porch in my robe with my hands trembling and my eyes downcast. She saw me. The bruises I tried to hide, the busted lip poorly covered by foundation, the way I flinched at every sound. Ruthie had lived across the street for nearly 20 years. We waved at each other, exchanged Christmas cookies, and once shared a tearful moment at the mailbox when her husband passed away. She'd been through her own hell, and she recognized the signs. I stepped back from the window as she raised her hand in a small wave. I didn't wave back. I couldn't. My heart was thudding in my chest, not from fear but from something else. Shame. The kind that sinks into your bones. That afternoon, as I was scrubbing the grout in the upstairs bathroom with my arthritic fingers throbbing and my back aching, I heard the sound of heels on tile and the front door opening. It was Lila. Her perfume hit me before her voice did. "Mrs. Holloway," she called in her usual syrupy tone. "I need that white blouse hand, washed by tonight. I'm going to dinner with the Devereaux." I bit my tongue. I always did. "Of course," I said. As I descended the stairs, blouse in hand, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Stooped shoulders, graying roots, a deep sadness behind the eyes. But worse than the sadness was the numbness, like all the color had drained out of me over the years. "I'll leave it on the laundry room counter," I said to Lila as I passed by the kitchen. She didn't respond. She was scrolling on her phone, her manicured fingers tapping rapidly, legs crossed, looking like she belonged in a magazine spread. I don't think she even knew what I looked like without makeup. As I walked away, I heard her mutter, "Honestly, how hard is it to iron a sleeve straight?" And that should have been it. Another comment to add to the pile. But for some reason, I stopped. I turned around, just a few inches. Not enough to be seen, but enough to hear her better. And that's when I caught something in her voice. Fatigue. Not irritation, not cruelty. Just exhaustion. I pressed the cold wall with my palm to steady myself and listened. Lila was talking on the phone now, to someone she trusted enough to speak freely with. Her voice dropped into a whisper. "No, he's getting worse. He threatened her again last night." "Yes, his mother. I told him to stop. I told him it was dangerous, but you know how he is when he's cornered." I froze. "I know she's old," she continued, her voice tight. "But it's not like she's helpless. She was shaking like a leaf this morning. Something's going to happen, and I don't want to be there when it does." She paused, listening. "Maybe. I don't know. Do you think someone would believe her if she talked to the police? She's got no proof, no witnesses, and Grant would bury her if she tried. End. I stepped back, carefully and quietly, retreating to the laundry room where I sat on the closed lid of the washer and stared at the blouse in my lap. So Leela knew. She had seen it, heard it, and done nothing. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as cold as I thought. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on my chest. I remembered holding Grant as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. I remembered staying up late to help him build science projects, sewing buttons onto his private school blazers, packing lunches with handwritten notes. Where had I gone wrong? And more importantly, what was I going to do now? The next morning, I was up before the sun. I made the usual breakfast. I added the cheese to the eggs just right. I poured the black coffee. Grant walked into the kitchen in his fitted navy suit, phone already pressed to his ear. He didn't acknowledge me. He never did. "Make sure the report's on my desk by 9, he barked into the phone. "And tell Mitchell that if he screws up that contract again, I'll have his head." He ended the call and sat down. "Toast's too dark," he muttered, not looking up. "I'll fix it," I said softly. But I didn't move. He looked up, confused. "What?" I said, "I'll fix it," I repeated. He narrowed his eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just thinking." "About what?" I didn't answer. That day, while they were both at work, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the house. I put on a long coat, grabbed the emergency cash I'd hidden in an old coffee tin, and walked 2 blocks to the library. My knees ached the whole way, and I had to stop twice to catch my breath. But I made it. Inside, the air was cool and smelled like old paper. I hadn't been there since Grant was a boy. I sat at one of the computers and typed, slowly, with trembling fingers. Domestic abuse hotline. Elder abuse shelters in South Carolina. How to get financial help after family violence. Each search result felt like a crack of lightning. There were numbers, websites, real people. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I'd brought with me, shielding the page with my hand as if I were hiding classified information. Then, just as I was about to shut the computer down, I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I flinched, but it was just the librarian, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "Are you looking for something in particular?" she asked. "No," I said quickly. "I'm just reading." She nodded and walked away. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I hurried home, the notebook tucked under my coat like a stolen treasure. When I reached my street, I saw Ruthie again. She was watering her azaleas. Our eyes met, and this time, I didn't look away. I walked over. She blinked in surprise. "Adie?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, I said, "Can we talk?" She dropped the hose immediately. "Of course." She brought me inside her house, sat me at her kitchen table, and poured me a cup of tea. I stared at the steam curling above the rim and tried to hold myself together. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," Ruthie said softly. "But I've seen it. I've been there." And that's when the tears came. I hadn't cried in weeks. I hadn't let myself. But in Ruthie's kitchen, surrounded by the smell of lemon polish and old lavender, I finally let go. I told her everything. The soup, the money, the cameras, the threats. And when I was done, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm going to help you," she said. "You're not alone anymore." I didn't realize how heavy the silence in my house had been until I sat in Ruthie's kitchen and heard what real quiet sounded like. Not the sharp, anxious quiet that follows a slammed door or the heavy hush of someone watching you from behind. This was a warm kind of silence filled with ticking clocks, the distant hum of an old fridge, the rustle of curtains in the breeze. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Ruthie didn't rush me. She didn't interrupt or ask too many questions. She just let me talk. And when I couldn't talk anymore, she handed me a tissue and quietly refilled my tea. "You said he checks your phone?" she asked finally. I nodded. "He has access to everything. I don't even know the password to my own bank account anymore." Ruthie pressed her lips together. "He's not just abusive, Edie. He's isolating you. That's a tactic. Make the victim feel helpless, dependent. It's what my ex did before he started hitting." I looked down at my cup. I feel like such a fool. I worked 40 years in law. I used to type up restraining orders, affidavits, even helped organize witness protection documents. I knew what abuse looked like. But it's different when it's your own child, she said gently. They know where your heart island, and that's where they hit. I swallowed hard. I want to leave, I do. But everything I have is tied up with him. The house, the money. He made me put his name on the deed for security, he said. And now, I don't know what's mine anymore. You need a lawyer, Ruthie said. Not just any lawyer, a good one. Someone who understands elder abuse and financial coercion. I don't have money to pay one, I replied, and even if I did, I'm scared. She squeezed my hand. Then we'll do it one step at a time. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small notebook. First, we're going to make a plan. I stared at her. You're serious? Dead serious. She flipped to a clean page. Step 1, document everything. You said he's got cameras in the house. Are they recording? I think so. And he controls the footage? Yes. All right, she said, jotting something down. Then we get our own. The next day, Ruthie showed up at my house with a grocery bag. Inside was a loaf of banana bread and a tiny wireless camera hidden inside a tissue box. We'll start here, she whispered, placing it discreetly on top of the kitchen cabinets. It points toward the table and stove. He doesn't need to know. That night, when Grant came home, I forced myself to act normal. I made dinner, nodded when he spoke, kept my hands from shaking. You didn't iron my shirts, he said sharply as he forked his chicken. I'll do it after dessert, I replied. He narrowed his eyes. You're acting weird. I'm just tired, I said. It wasn't a lie. Later, as I stood at the ironing board in the laundry room, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart jumped, but I didn't turn. He stood there for a long moment. You've been going out, he said quietly. I saw the footage. You left the house yesterday. I kept my eyes on the iron. I went for a walk. Just needed air. Who did you talk to? No one. A pause. If I find out you're speaking to anyone, Ruthie, the police, a lawyer, this ends badly, Mom. Understand? I nodded, afraid to speak. And then, just as he turned to leave, he added, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just trying to keep you safe. You're 70. You can't handle the world anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room long after they'd gone to bed, staring at the silent television, the blue glow casting long shadows on the floor. I don't know when the idea came to me. Maybe it was something Ruthie said. Maybe it was that little spark of defiance I felt every time Grant threatened me. I needed someone with power, someone who could help quietly. I reached for the old Rolodex I kept in the desk drawer, flipping through yellowed cards until I found her name. Marilyn Brooks. My sister. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years. Our last phone call ended with shouting. She'd begged me to move up north with her, to get out of Greenville, said Grant was a parasite, that I was letting him ruin my life. I told her she was wrong. She told me I was blind. We hadn't spoken since. But now, maybe she was right. The next morning, while Grant and Lila were out, I walked to the gas station down the block and asked to use the payphone outside. It took 3 tries before she answered. Hello? I nearly hung up. Marilyn, I whispered. Silence. Edie? I need help. The pause that followed was so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, softly, where are you? I told her everything. The bruises, the money, the cameras, the threats. My voice cracked as I spoke, but I kept going. I should have listened to you, I said finally. I was wrong. Marilyn didn't say, I told you so. She didn't scold me. She said, I'm getting on a flight. Today. By that afternoon, she was in Greenville. She hadn't changed much, still sharp, still no nonsense, but there was something gentler in her now. She hugged me longer than she ever had before and whispered, You're not alone anymore. We went straight to Ruthie's. The 3 of us sat at her table and built a plan. Marilyn made calls. She knew people, judges, attorneys, women's shelters. And by nightfall, we had names. Numbers. A lawyer who agreed to meet us in secret the next morning. Grant didn't suspect a thing. Not yet. But he would. The air in Ruthie's kitchen was thick with quiet tension. Marilyn sat across from me with her reading glasses perched low on her nose, scribbling in a legal pad like she was back in court. Ruthie stood at the stove making tea, but her ears were clearly tuned to every word. "You need to understand," Marilyn said, looking at me over her glasses. "This isn't just domestic violence. This is elder abuse, financial fraud, emotional manipulation. You could press charges today, and he'd be in handcuffs by sunset." I shook my head slowly. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Marilyn said, sharper now. "Edie, he's been robbing you, hitting you, threatening you. If this were anyone else, any client I've ever worked with, you'd be screaming for justice. But he's not just anyone," I said. "He's my son." Marilyn leaned back in her chair and exhaled. "That's what makes it harder, and what makes it more important." I looked at Ruthie, who gave me the smallest nod. Her eyes, always kind, were full of something deeper, now resolve. She had lived this once. She knew the terrain. And unlike me, she had gotten out. The next morning, Marilyn arranged for us to meet with a woman named Nina Callahan, an assistant district attorney who specialized in family-based abuse cases. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in a quiet corner booth at a bakery near the courthouse neutral ground. No pressure. I barely slept the night before. I kept imagining Grant walking in while I was gone, discovering I'd left the house, finding some hint of the camera in the kitchen. I imagined what his face would look like, how quickly it would shift from confusion to rage, and I imagined what he might do with that rage. But I went anyway. Nina was younger than I expected. Early 40s, maybe. Crisp blazer, no-nonsense haircut, and eyes that saw through everything. She shook my hand firmly, sat down, and said, "Miss Holloway, I want you to tell me everything." And I did. I told her about the bruises, the cameras, the money, the manipulation. I told her how my pension had vanished, how I was given $20 a week like a child, how my own house didn't feel like mine anymore. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped her pen on her notepad and said, "Do you know how many cases I've handled like this?" I shook my head. "Too many," she said. "But do you know how many women your age come forward?" Again, I shook my head. "Almost none, because they're ashamed, or scared, or convinced they won't be believed. But Edie, you have something most of them don't." "What's that?" "People who believe you, people who are willing to fight with you." She glanced at Marilyn, then Ruthie, then back at me. "If you're ready, we can begin building a case. We'll need documentation, bank records, medical reports, witness statements, anything you can gather. And most importantly," she leaned in, "we need your voice. We need your courage." Courage. It sounded like such a big word, bigger than I felt, but something in the way she said it calm, steady, like she'd seen women rise from worse, gave me the smallest ounce of faith. "I'll do it," I said quietly. Nina nodded. "Good. Now we have to move fast." She pulled out a list and walked us through each step. First, get copies of my medical records. Second, access any financial documents I could find, especially those with Grant's name. Third, keep the recordings from Ruthie's hidden camera secure. And lastly, file a petition to regain sole ownership of the house. Marilyn was already ahead of her, taking notes furiously. But as we left the cafe and stepped into the brisk November air, a thought gripped me. What if he already knew? When we arrived back at the house, the door was slightly ajar. I froze. "Edie, stay here," Marilyn said quickly. She motioned for Ruthie to call the police and stepped forward, carefully pushing the door open. The living room was in disarray. Cushions slashed, drawers pulled out, photos smashed. My coffee table was flipped. The ceramic angel figurine Grant had made me in second grade lay in shattered pieces on the floor. I stepped inside and my knees buckled. "My God," I whispered. Marilyn caught me by the arm. "He's sending a message." On the coffee table, written in black marker, were 4 words scrawled across the wood. "Keep your mouth shut." We filed a police report immediately. The officers were kind, but clearly frustrated. "No signs of forced entry," one of them said. "If he has a key, he can claim he came to check on you." "He doesn't live here anymore," Marilyn snapped. "Still legally listed on the deed," the officer replied. "It's murky, but the threat changes things." I stood in the kitchen while they documented the scene, holding the broken angel in my hand. Its head was missing. It was a warning, but also a crack in his armor. He was scared. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and whispered conversations. Marilyn handled the legal side: petitions, affidavits, emergency motions. Ruthie helped me pack up anything important. Family documents, legal records, photo albums. We moved it all to her house for safekeeping. Nina worked behind the scenes, gathering evidence, contacting people at Grant's company, and reaching out to potential witnesses. And then, something unexpected happened. Lila called me. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at Ruthie's, folding laundry, when the phone rang. It was her number. My stomach dropped. "Edie?" Her voice was trembling. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. "What do you want?" I didn't know it was this bad," she said. "I mean, I knew he was difficult, but I didn't know he'd hurt you. Not like that." "You saw the bruises," I said flatly. I don't know. I thought maybe you fell, that you were covering for him." "I was." She went silent. "I'm sorry," she said after a long pause. "He's been controlling with me too, with money, with who I talk to, but I was too afraid to see it clearly." "What changed?" She exhaled shakily. "He told me last night that if I ever spoke to you again, he'd ruin me, that he had things on me, emails, conversations, texts." And then he smiled, like he enjoyed saying it. I said nothing. "I want to help," she added. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I've seen." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something. The day Lila offered to testify was the day I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a witness. There's a difference. Victims wait in the shadows, hoping someone will come to save them. Witnesses stand in the light, holding the truth like a torch, even when their hands shake. I wasn't ready for everything that followed. The interviews, the notarized statements, the endless questions. But I showed up. I sat across from detectives and prosecutors and social workers, and I told the truth. Sometimes my voice cracked. Sometimes I had to stop and breathe. But I never lied, and I never backed down. Marilyn told me that truth is a slow, steady hammer. It doesn't always smash things open, but it chips away at the lies until they crumble. And Grant's lies were starting to fall apart. Lila's testimony changed everything. She didn't just confirm what I'd told Nina and the police. She added new layers: the financial manipulation, the screaming matches, the moments when Grant threatened to cut off her access to her own accounts. She had emails, voicemails, screenshots. "He called me an investment," she said during her statement. "Not a wife, not a partner, just something he poured money into and expected dividends from." She'd saved every receipt. Meanwhile, Marilyn uncovered documents that proved I was the sole legal owner of the house. The change Grant made to the deed had never been properly filed, just forged. That, in itself, was a crime. "He's going down, Edie," Marilyn told me one night as we sat on Ruthie's porch under a sky full of stars. "But you have to be ready. He's going to fight dirty." I knew she was right. What I didn't know was just how dirty. It started with a letter, typed, anonymous, slipped under Ruthie's front door in the middle of the night. It said, "Your mother wasn't always so innocent. Ask her about the Williams case, about Sullivan and Associates, about the documents she altered." My blood ran cold. The Williams case. 15 years ago, when I worked at the law firm, we'd represented a pharmaceutical company in a class action lawsuit. The case involved a drug with dangerous side effects. One day, my boss, Mr. Sullivan, had asked me to refile a set of internal memos. "Just clean them up," he said. "Remove any redundancies." I'd done what I was told, removed 3 pages, changed the date on a memo. At the time, I thought it was routine. Secretarial work, nothing more. But I had a sinking feeling now that it hadn't been innocent at all. When I told Marilyn, she didn't flinch. "That's what he's counting on," she said. "He wants you scared. He wants you to believe he can destroy you, but guess what?" "What?" "You've already survived worse." We contacted Nina immediately. She brought in a legal ethics expert, and together we reviewed the case files. It turns out Grant had somehow gotten access to my old personnel files from Sullivan and Associates, probably stolen from a storage unit I'd forgotten was still in my name. He had copies of the altered documents. He had pictures, notes, and now he was using them to blackmail me. He'll claim you helped cover up evidence in a wrongful death case, Nina said, that you were complicit in a corporate conspiracy. But I didn't know, I cried. I was just doing what I was told. We believe you, she said calmly, but the public might not. Which is why you need to get ahead of this. Get ahead. How? Tell the truth, before he can weaponize it. And that's how I found myself sitting in front of a news camera. It was a local affiliate, small-town station, but Marilyn insisted it was necessary. You need to take back the narrative, she said. If this story breaks, it should be your voice they hear, not his lies. I wore a soft blue blouse. Ruthie helped with my hair. Lila sat in the corner holding my hand. Nina stood behind the camera. And when the red light blinked on, I began. My name is Edith Holloway. I'm 70 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been the victim of abuse at the hands of my son. I told my story, not just the bruises and the stolen money, but the guilt, the silence, the fear. I told them how easy it was to ignore red flags when they came from someone you love, how shame can be stronger than pain, and how the hardest thing I'd ever done was admit that my child was hurting me. Then, I talked about the Williams case. I made mistakes, I said. I altered documents I didn't fully understand. I trusted people I shouldn't have, and for that, I'm sorry. I looked into the camera and said, but I will no longer be silent. I refuse to let my son use my past to excuse his present. When the segment aired that night, Ruthie's phone didn't stop ringing. Neighbors, former co-workers, even strangers. Some offered support. Others shared their own stories. A few said nothing but, thank you. The next day, Grant was arrested. He didn't go quietly. The police found him at his office, shredding files. He shouted, cursed, called me names I won't repeat. But when they showed him the arrest warrant, he went pale. The charges included elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, witness intimidation, breaking and entering. Lila's testimony was key. So were the recordings Ruthie had made, the forged documents, the stolen pension files. But more than any of that, what really sealed it was the public pressure. People cared. People were watching. And the system, for once, responded. They denied him bail. Marilyn and I sat in the courtroom, side by side, as the judge read the charges. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't look at Grant. I didn't have to. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in control. The house was silent again. Not the brittle silence I'd lived with for years, where every creak of the floorboards meant danger, every shadow in the hallway meant Grant. No, this was something else entirely. A stillness I hadn't felt in decades. It was quiet in a way that made the clock ticking in the hallway sound like a symphony. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sunlight pooling on the linoleum floor. The smell of coffee drifted up from my cup, untouched. Everything was still, safe. And yet, I felt nothing. Grant had been in jail for 4 days. The court hearing went as expected. He looked smug, then shocked, then angry, then quiet. He didn't look at me, and I didn't look at him. Marilyn held my hand the whole time. Ruthie sat behind us in silent support. When it was over, we stepped out into the gray winter air, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Cold, without fear. But it wasn't freedom yet. Not really. Because even though the door no longer slammed at 6:45 every night, even though there were no more footsteps pacing upstairs, no more orders barked from the hallway, my body still expected them. My muscles still tensed when I heard a car engine outside. My breath still caught in my throat at sharp noises. The body remembers. That's what the trauma counselor said. Yes, I have a trauma counselor now. Her name is Karen. Ruthie insisted I see someone, and Nina connected me with a local therapist who specializes in elder abuse. I didn't want to go at first. I thought, I'm 70. What good is therapy now? But Karen didn't ask me to lie on a couch or talk about my childhood. She asked me what I felt when I buttered my toast in the morning. She asked me when the last time was that I felt proud. That one stung. Because I didn't remember. Not until that afternoon, when I walked out of her office, and a woman in the waiting room whispered, "Thank you." She had seen me on the news. She said, "You gave me the courage to tell my daughter." That's when the pride crept back in. Not as a flood, but as a trickle. A single breath that didn't feel laced with shame. Back at home, I started rearranging the furniture. It sounds silly, but it felt symbolic. I moved the couch away from the wall. I put the china hutch back where it used to be. I boxed up all the photos of Grant and stored them in the attic. Not because I hated him, but because I needed space. Space for my own face to return to my own home. Lila came by 2 days after the arrest. She knocked gently, and when I opened the door, she was holding a grocery bag full of tangerines and lavender soap. "I didn't know what to bring," she said softly. "You brought yourself," I said. "That's enough." She stayed for tea. We didn't talk about Grant at first. We talked about the weather, about her new job search, about how she couldn't stand the lavender candle in the guest bathroom, but always pretended to like it. Eventually, the conversation slowed, and she looked down at her cup. "I thought marrying him would fix something in me," she said. "I thought if I just kept everything perfect, kept the house clean, smiled the right way, wore what he liked, I could keep the darkness out." I nodded. I thought the same thing when I raised him. She looked up, surprised. "I thought if I gave him everything, my time, my love, my money, that he'd never turn cruel. That I could love the rage out of him." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you didn't make him that way." "No," I said, "but I made it easier for him to become who he island." We didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this," she said. "It's your retirement account statement. From 3 years ago. I think it might help your case." I opened it with trembling hands. There it was clear as day, $287,400 transferred to a joint account I never authorized. It wasn't just theft. It was a confession in black and white. Lila left shortly after, and I stood at the door, watching her walk down the front steps like a woman finally learning to carry her own weight. That night, I sat in my living room with a notebook and pen. I made a list, a real one. Not a list of chores or appointments, but a list of wants. Plant a garden in the spring, go to the beach, Charleston, reconnect with my book club, visit Marilyn in Boston, make peach cobbler again, real butter this time, sing in church, maybe, just once, dance without looking over my shoulder. I stared at the list for a long time. It felt daring. And then I added one more line at the bottom. Forgive myself. The phone rang that evening. It was Nina. "Good news," she said. "They've agreed to drop any review of the old Williams case. The documents you signed weren't incriminating, and your statement on the news helped tremendously. It's behind you now." I let out a long breath. I hadn't realized how much that shadow was still hanging over me. "And Edie?" she added. "They're moving forward with full prosecution on Grant. We'll need you in court soon." I nodded. "I'll be there." End quote. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't have to, but old habits die hard. I brewed a pot of coffee, cracked the window to let in the crisp air, and sat by the kitchen table. Birds chirped, leaves rustled. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 3B, knees pressed together, hands folded tight in my lap. Marilyn was beside me, flipping through a folder of documents like she was preparing for trial herself. Across from us, Nina stood talking to another attorney, her blazer crisp, her tone calm, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "You okay?" Marilyn asked, squeezing my arm. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know what okay feels like anymore." "You're about to find out," she said softly. They called us in just after 9. The courtroom was small, the kind used for preliminary hearings and procedural motions. But to me, it felt like walking into a coliseum. Grant was already seated at the defendant's table. He wore a gray suit, probably borrowed, maybe from a public defender. His hair was too neatly combed, his tie too perfect. He didn't look at me. Not at first, but I looked at him. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, The little boy who used to crawl into my bed after a thunderstorm, clutching his teddy bear, asking me to sing. It only lasted a second. Then he turned, saw me, and the coldness in his eyes returned. The judge, a woman named Hawkins, entered and the room rose. She was sharp, efficient, and utterly unfazed by the tension in the air. People versus Grant Holloway, the bailiff called. Nina stood. Your Honor, the prosecution is prepared to proceed with opening remarks and present our initial witness. The defense attorney, a man in a cheap suit who looked exhausted, already stood too. We're prepared, Your Honor. I was the first witness. It was strange, walking up to that little box beside the judge's bench, raising my right hand, swearing to tell the truth. I had always been on the other side of this process, typing transcripts, organizing case files, watching lawyers pace. Never once did I imagine I'd be inside the box, telling my own story. Nina approached gently, her voice calm and even. Mrs. Holloway, how long have you lived at your current residence? 39 years, I said. My voice shook, but I held it steady. I bought it in 1984, raised my son there. Can you describe your relationship with your son, the defendant? I swallowed hard. It changed. Over time. At first, he was my everything. Then, he became something else. Controlling, angry, violent. Can you tell the court what happened on the evening of the 18th of October of this year? I told them about the soup, the salt, the bowl, the blood. I told them about the fear, the bruises, the way I'd sat on the kitchen floor until dawn cleaning up evidence of my own assault. I told them about the pension, the cameras, the $20 allowances, the isolation. Every word was a wound reopened. But I spoke them anyway. When Nina asked, "Why did you stay?" I paused. Because I was ashamed, I said. Because I thought I had failed as a mother. Because admitting the truth meant giving up on the idea that love could fix everything. Grant shifted in his seat, arms crossed. He looked angry, not surprised, not regretful, just angry. When Nina was done, the defense attorney stood. He tried to sound polite, professional, but his questions had an edge. Mrs. Holloway, is it true you altered documents in a previous job? Yes, I said. Under instruction, not knowing the full implication. I've since taken responsibility. And would you say your memory is reliable? At 70? I remember every time my son raised his hand to me, I replied. He backed off after that. When I stepped down, my knees were shaking, but my heart felt steady. Marilyn gave me a tight hug. Ruthie, who had arrived midway through the testimony, reached out and took my hand. Then came Lila. Her testimony was devastating. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. In a clear, calm voice, she recounted every moment she'd witnessed, every bruise, every stolen check, every threat. She handed over the financial records, the emails, the voicemails. He called her an expense, she said. Said if she died, he could finally sell the house and invest properly. Gasps echoed from the gallery. The judge called a recess shortly after that. I stepped into the hallway and pressed my hand against the cool stone wall. My breath was shallow, my heart racing. But this wasn't panic. It was adrenaline. It was survival. Back in the courtroom, Grant finally took the stand. It was a gamble his lawyer must have thought he could charm the judge, appear remorseful, twist the narrative. And for a while, it seemed like it might work. She's confused, he said. She's old. She's forgetful. I tried to help her manage her affairs. She got paranoid. I never hit her. Never. He looked directly at me. She used to forget the stove on. She wandered outside barefoot in winter. I took care of her. This is how she repays me. Lies. All of it. But he said them with such ease, such polish. It chilled me. Nina cross-examined him with surgical precision. Mr. Holloway, who owned the account where the pension was deposited? My mother. And who controlled that account? I managed it. For her benefit. Did you have power of attorney? Number. She turned to the judge. No further questions. At the end of the day, Judge Hawkins announced the case would proceed to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. She denied bail again. And as the bailiff escorted Grant out of the courtroom, he looked back at me. But I didn't look away this time. I met his eyes. And for the first time, He was the one who flinched. The morning light fell through the courthouse windows in slats, painting lines across my hands before I raised them to speak again. I had always thought that justice would feel like fireworks, like homecoming or a parade. But walking into that courtroom this morning, I realized something. Justice doesn't roar, it whispers. It gathers people, truths, tiny pieces of courage, all zoning in until the quiet becomes undeniable. I sat at the prosecution table, as close to Nina and Marilyn as possible, feeling the reassurance in their presence. When the bailiff called the court to order, I took a last breath and stood. "This is the final hearing," the judge said. Her voice stunned the emptiness out of the room. "We will hear closing statements, then the ruling will be delivered." My heart pounded, but in that moment, I felt grounded, unafraid, a survivor. Nina rose first. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "The evidence we have brought before this court is not drawn from speculation, hearsay, or wishful thinking. It is from bank statements, video footage, witness statements, and financial records, each telling a consistent story. One of escalating abuse, exploitation, and manipulation by the defendant." She pooled the gallery with her gaze. "Miss Holloway, Mrs. Palmer, and Miss Brooks are not asking for vengeance. They stand here seeking accountability, not just for what was taken, but for what was nearly silenced, for every bruise, broken wall, and trembling whisper that this court heard." She closed her notebook and met the judge's eyes before sitting. Next came the defense. Their arguments were flat, mechanical, rehearsed. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "Mr. Holloway has demonstrated remorse for his actions. The relationship was strained. His frustrations, while inappropriate, were never criminal. Mrs. Holloway has recuperated, the property situation is being settled, and we believe retribution has been served through this process." He spoke about stress, misunderstandings, mental health, all phrases that felt too hollow for the truth that had echoed in my home for years. Then I stood. I walked slowly up to the stand and raised my hand once more. For a moment, the world went quiet. They had seen me testify weeks ago. But this time, I wasn't just telling the story. I was drawing a line. "Your Honor," I began, "I'm not here to punish my son. I'm not the only victim. Every harsh word he whispered, worthless, incompetent, crazy, those were words he believed about me. Until I stood here. Until people like Ruthie and Lila and Marilyn reminded me who I was." I paused, looking out at the faces in the gallery, Ruthie fanning herself in the back row, Lila with red-rimmed eyes, Marilyn calmly clutching my hand. I am 70 years old. I spent my life putting others first. My son, my job, my family. I never thought I'd have to fight for what the law says is already mine. My home, my dignity. But today, I stand here not forgiving what was done to me, but forgiving what I did to myself, the shame I carried for far too long. I turned slightly toward Grant, then looked back to the judge. "He stole from me. He hurt me. He intimidated me. But you can't erase a life spent doing the right thing. You can't erase a 70-year-old woman's decades of integrity. Please serve justice not for me, but so that no mother like me ever has to wonder if anyone will believe her." That was all I had. I stepped down, trembling, hoping the strength I felt wasn't just me trying to trick myself into courage. The judge leaned forward, fingers laced. She stared at her notes, then at us. "This court finds the defendant guilty on all charges." It felt like the quiet in my chest exploded into real, solid light. Grant slumped in the defense chair. At the back, Lila sobbed silently. Marilyn's eyes were on me, proud. Judge Hawkins spoke again. "Sentencing will occur next week. For now, the defendant will remain in custody. Miss Holloway, you are free to go. And I hope this freedom is one you no longer second-guess." After the verdict, outside the courthouse, the air was cold but clear, the kind that hurts your lungs in a way that tells you you're alive. Lila reached for my hand. Ruthie wiped tears off her cheeks. Even Nina let herself smile. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. It was enough to walk across the courtyard grounded in our truth and each other. A new beginning. The following weeks felt surreal. I walked through my yard as the bulbs I'd planted began to peek through. I opened the front door wide. No cameras, no fear. I went through my house, room by room, touching walls, finding corners in which I could breathe. The china cabinet held full shelves, again dusted and polished. My phone rang often. One day, a reporter called not to dredge up the story, but to ask a simple question, "What's next, Mrs. Holloway?" I thought, then replied, "I'm going to rebuild. Not just my home, but my life. I've got a book club meeting tomorrow, first time in ages, and I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I once sat, broken, forgotten, afraid. I looked at the list I'd written in part 7. I smiled. Quietly, but truly. Then I added one more line, something small, almost playful, but real. Take a dance lesson, just for fun. I looked into the dark window with soft determination. There had been a long night, a very long one, but the sun was finally back. The sound of the garden hose sputtering back to life was oddly comforting. I stood in the middle of my backyard, holding the nozzle in one hand and a packet of seeds in the other, watching the earth soften under the spray. It had been years, maybe a decade, since I'd planted anything back here. Life had gotten too full, then too dark. But today, the dirt felt like promise. I bent slowly, knees cracking, and pressed a seed into the ground. Peonies, me favorite. It was the first day of March. The air still had a bite to it, but there was a hint of spring riding the wind. I could smell it: damp soil, old grass, and something else. Freedom. 2 weeks had passed since the final verdict. Grant had been sentenced to 12 years. There was no celebration in it for me. No joy, just closure. A door closing without slamming. I didn't attend the sentencing. Marilyn did, and so did Nina. They called me afterward. Marilyn said the judge's voice had been firm, but fair. He showed no remorse, she told me. Still blamed you. I nodded, unsurprised. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want to see him suffer. I just wanted him gone. Lately, my days were slow but full, in a way they hadn't been in years. I started each morning with a walk around the block. Ruthie joined me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We walked arm in arm, laughing about things like our backs hurting or how her cat refuses to use the new litter box. "It's the scented kind," she'd say. "He's a snob." Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Just walked. Let the morning sun warm our cheeks. Let our silence say everything. Lila visited twice a week. She'd started volunteering with a nonprofit that helps women in controlling relationships. She was quieter now, more thoughtful. Sometimes sad, sometimes tired, but honest. We were rebuilding something, brick by brick. And Marilyn? She stayed longer than expected. She said it was to help me get through the paperwork. But I knew the truth. She was making sure I didn't fall back into old patterns. "I'm not leaving until I see you dance at least once," she teased. "You mean like, in the kitchen?" I laughed. I mean out in public. A real dance floor. We're not dying quiet in this town, Edie. That night, I sat by the fire pit in the backyard, wrapped in my mother's old quilt. I stared at the flames and listened to the sounds of the night, the cicadas, the wind through the trees, the faint hum of a radio playing somewhere down the street, and I thought about the moments I'd never expected to get back. Sitting in a quiet room without fear, holding a warm cup of tea without trembling hands, laughing, really laughing until my stomach hurt, answering the phone without dreading who might be on the other end, sleeping through the night. They were small things, but to me, they were everything. I picked up my notebook, the one where I'd started my want list. I flipped through the pages. Some items already had check marks beside them. Reconnect with my book club, bake peach cobbler with real butter, visit Marilyn in Boston, scheduled, sing in church, just once, and off-key, but it counted, and at the bottom, still unmarked, take a dance lesson. I smiled and scribbled a note beside it. This Saturday, with Ruthie, no backing out. The next morning, we walked into the community center together, 2 older women, arms linked, nervous and giddy like high school girls. The room was full of strangers, couples, singles, a man in his 80s doing knee stretches, a woman with bright pink hair chatting with the instructor. It was loud, friendly, unapologetically joyful. I almost turned around, but Ruthie whispered, "You made it through hell. What's one dance step?" So we danced. Poorly, clumsily, with much apologizing and stepping on feet, But we laughed until we cried. And somewhere in that mess of rhythm and spinning and learning where to put our hands, I realized something. I wasn't broken anymore. Still healing, sure. Still bruised in places no one could see. But not broken, not gone. Just changed. And maybe, in some strange way, stronger. When we got home, I made us tea. We sat on the porch, sipping slowly, watching the last streaks of sunlight stretch across the yard. Ruthie looked at me and said, "You know, if you ever wanted to speak somewhere, church group, library event, whatever, I think people would listen." I thought about it. About what it would mean to stand in front of others. Not as a victim or even a survivor, but as a witness to hope. "Maybe," I said. "One day." She nodded, satisfied, and as the wind picked up and the chimes on the porch sang their soft song, I thought, maybe that's how healing works. Not in one grand moment, but in small, stubborn, beautiful steps. Spring had fully unfolded in Greenville, slipping its soft green fingers into every quiet corner of my world. The cherry trees along our street had bloomed, petals falling like confetti onto sidewalks cracked with age and memory. I stood at my kitchen window most mornings now, holding a mug of lavender tea, listening to the hum of life just beginning to stir outside. It was still new to me, this peace. Still fragile, but it was mine. One of those mornings I received a text from Lila. Just a simple message, "Coffee at noon?" And I said yes, without hesitation. We'd met up a few times since the trial, cautiously rebuilding something between us. That day, as I walked into the small cafe on Main Street, I realized I wasn't walking in as someone hiding from the world, I was stepping into it. Lila was already there, sipping something foamy and caramel-colored. Her face looked softer now, freer somehow. She smiled when she saw me. We talked about her job at the nonprofit, how she'd started helping women recover from financial abuse. She told me how some of them couldn't even open their own bank accounts without shaking, how they came in thinking they'd never trust again. "It's hard," she said, eyes lowering to her cup. "But it's also healing." I reached across the table, touched her hand, and told her, honestly, "You're helping people find their footing again. That's something to be proud of." Her eyes welled a little, but she smiled. "You're not allowed to act surprised. I learned that from watching you." And, after we parted ways, I walked down to the library. Something in me stirred like a nudge I couldn't ignore. There was a flyer taped to the front window. Community event. Finding your voice after silence. Without overthinking, I stepped inside, found the sign-up sheet, and wrote my name. When the day of the event arrived, I almost didn't go. My hands shook as I ironed my blouse, and I had to sit down twice just to catch my breath. But I remembered what Ruthie had told me once, sitting on her porch with her cat curled at her feet. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up. So I showed up. The library auditorium was half full. Mostly women, some older, some not, some alone, some with friends. They looked tired, like me, but they also looked ready. I stood at the podium, heart racing, throat dry, and began. "I'm 70 years old," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And for the first time in decades, I stand here not because I'm trying to survive, but because I chose to live." I told them about Grant, yes, about the bruises and the threats and the fear that crept into the corners of my kitchen, my mind, my sleep. But more than that, I talked about shame, how it wraps around you like smoke and convinces you you're the fire. I talked about how long I waited for someone else to see me, only to realize I had to see myself first. I told them about Ruthie's quiet kindness, about Marilyn's unwavering protection, about Lila's bravery, and about the list I'd written on my kitchen table the night after Grant was taken away. When I stepped away from the podium, the applause wasn't thunderous, it was soft, slow, but full of meaning. One woman hugged me. Another slipped me a note that simply said, "Me too." In the days that followed, my routines grew richer. I kept my appointments with Karen, my therapist, who reminded me that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming. I kept tending to my garden, where my peonies were now little green fists pushing through the soil, refusing to be buried. Ruthie came by with jars of quince jelly and stories about her stubborn cat. Marilyn and I finally booked my flight to Boston. We were going to have our long-overdue sister trip, complete with seafood, old photos, and probably some bad hotel coffee. And one evening, after checking another item off my list, singing, however timidly, in church I found myself sitting on my back porch, watching the sun ease its way behind the trees. In that quiet, I picked up my notebook and smiled at the next unchecked line. Take a dance lesson. I wrote beside it, this Saturday, with Ruthie, no excuses, because this is what healing looks like. It doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It shows up like the first warm breeze after winter, like laughter in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, like knowing, without doubt, that the life you're building is yours again. And this time, I was going to dance all the way through it. The funny thing about peace is how unfamiliar it feels at first. You'd think it would come gently, like the sigh of a quiet room or the hush after a storm. But for me, it came with confusion, with questions like, what now? Who am I without fear? I asked Karen that during one of our sessions. She tilted her head and smiled. That's the right question, she said. And it's the beginning of your real life. So I started building not just routines, but a sense of purpose. I wasn't content to just be free. I wanted to become something better than what I'd been before the abuse. Stronger, braver, louder. That's how I ended up volunteering at the community center every Wednesday morning. It started small. Lila had mentioned they needed someone to help with basic paperwork and answer phones. I'd been a secretary for 4 decades. Filing forms was practically my native language. The first day, I walked in wearing a blouse with little blue flowers, my hair pinned neatly. My hands trembled a bit, but nobody noticed. I sat at the front desk and smiled at every single person who walked through the door. One woman, her name was Angela, came in with her teenage daughter. She had a fresh bruise under her left eye, the kind that told a whole story in one glance. She didn't say much, just filled out the intake forms, her fingers shaking. Before she left, I handed her a cup of tea. You're not alone, I said. She looked up, just for a second, and I saw it the thing I'd seen in my own reflection too many times. Not just fear, but shame. And just behind it, a tiny ember of hope. That ember is everything. Week by week, I found myself doing more, helping organize group meetings, talking to other women, listening to their stories. They always started the same way. He didn't used to be like this. Or I thought it was my fault. I didn't give them advice. I gave them company. And sometimes that's more important. One afternoon, Lila pulled me aside. They want you to speak at our spring survivor luncheon, she said. Oh no, I replied, laughing nervously. I don't do luncheons or microphones. And you did a whole talk at the library, she reminded me. That was different. This is your chance to show them what survival looks like, she said softly. What after looks like. I thought about it all night. And then I said yes. The luncheon was held in the banquet room of a modest hotel just outside town. Long tables lined with white cloths and vases of fresh tulips. Most of the room was filled with women, a few men, a few teenagers, all of them looking for something. I stood at the front, palms sweating, throat dry. Lila gave me a small nod from the back of the room. Ruthie sat near the front, smiling proudly. I cleared my throat and began. My name is Edie, I said, and for a long time, I forgot that was enough. I told them about my son, but I didn't dwell on him. I focused on what came after, on how I had to reintroduce myself to myself, how I had to learn to laugh again, to trust again, to eat dinner without feeling like I was being watched. I told them about therapy, about gardening, about dancing badly and singing off-key. And then I said this. People talk about survival like it's a finish line. But it's not. It's a doorway. The real life starts after, when you stop bracing for impact and start learning how to live without armor. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, and then another. And before I knew it, they were all standing. Not because I was special, but because we all saw ourselves in each other. That night, I sat on my back porch again. The air smelled like rain and fresh dirt. The peonies were just starting to bloom, bold little buds rising from the ground like a promise. I thought about the old woman I was becoming. Not bitter, not broken, but sturdy, like one of those old oak trees that have been through every storm and are still standing. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, typed, "I saw your talk online. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm getting help. I'm in a program. You were right, I was broken. I'm trying to fix that." It wasn't signed, but I knew. I sat with it for a long time. And then, gently, I folded it and placed it in a box on my bookshelf. Not out of hope, not out of reconciliation, but as a reminder. Some healing doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. Some journeys happen quietly. And mine, while filled with voices and stories and hands reaching back to pull others forward, would always come down to this: one choice at a time, one small joy at a time, one step daring, difficult, defiant toward the light. Summer came like a slow-burning candle, not all at once, but in steady flickers, the warmth on my back porch in the late afternoons, the longer daylight stretching over the garden, the way the tomatoes ripened earlier than I expected. Everything around me was blooming with quiet intention, and I, for the first time in my long life, felt like I was finally doing the same. I didn't know exactly when it happened, but one morning I woke up and didn't think about him. Not out of denial, not from bitterness, but because the fear no longer led the day. I rose, brewed my coffee, and opened the windows to let in the warm breeze. The world outside was humming gently, birds chirping, lawnmowers buzzing in the distance, someone laughing on the sidewalk. I looked at the peonies, full bloom, blushing, brave things. I smiled. They had come a long way, too. That week, the nonprofit where I volunteered was hosting a summer retreat, an overnight weekend for survivors in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Lila asked me to come, not to speak this time, but just to be part of the group, to sit, listen, rest. "You've earned that," she said. So, I packed a weekend bag, slipped my mother's quilt over my shoulder, and climbed into Lila's car with Ruthie and another woman named Carla. We drove for 3 hours through winding roads and thick green forests, singing along to old country songs and laughing like we were 20 again. It felt easy, light. The retreat was simple. Wooden cabins nestled among tall pines, picnic tables under wide canvas tents, meals cooked over open fire. No phones, no clocks, just stories, stars, and silence when we needed it. I hadn't slept that deeply in years. The mountain air wrapped around me like something holy. On the second night, we all sat in a circle by the fire. There were 12 of us. Different ages, colors, voices. Each woman held something broken, but none of us were defeated. We were cracked in the way that lets the light through. One by one, we shared something, not always the whole story, just what we had the strength for. When it came to me, I held silence for a while. Then I said, "I used to think healing meant I had to go back to who I was before, but now I know. I'm not supposed to go back. I'm supposed to become someone new, someone softer but stronger." The women around me nodded. Some cried, some smiled. One woman whispered, "Thank you." And that was enough. When we got back home, something shifted again. I stopped keeping the box with Grant's letter on my shelf. I placed it in the attic not to hide it, but to free the space. I no longer needed reminders of pain to validate my strength. My life was proof enough. I rejoined the church choir, not because I had forgiven everything, but because singing made my chest feel wide again. I started teaching a memoir class at the senior center. Just 6 ladies and one old man named Walter, who insisted his life was boring but wrote about it so tenderly we all cried by the second week. One Wednesday, after class, Ruthie leaned over and said, "You've become kind of unstoppable." I laughed. That's what happens when you stop tiptoeing around your own life. And it was true. Every small thing I did felt like planting a flag, marking a moment where I reclaimed some tiny corner of my identity, baking pies not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. Wearing red lipstick again, not for anyone else, but because it made me feel less invisible. Dancing at Lila's birthday party until my knees ached. Then, one Friday morning, I received a call. From the prison chaplain. "Mrs. Holloway," he said gently, "your son's asked if he can write you again, not to ask for anything. He says he's been going through a lot of reflection in group therapy. He's expressed remorse, but I wanted to ask you directly if you're open to hearing from him." I stood there, one hand on the countertop, the phone buzzing quietly in my ear. I wasn't ready. Not yet. "Thank you," I said, voice calm. But not at this time. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I went outside, Saturday on my porch, looked at the sky, and breathed. Because forgiveness is not a door you open for someone else, it's a path you walk when you're ready. And some days, healing looks like saying no. That evening, I wrote a new list. Not one of recovery, but one of intention. Take a train to Charleston in the fall. Write my full story. Not for court, but for me. Adopt a cat. Learn to make lemon bars from scratch. Travel with Marilyn again. Maybe Maine next time. Plant tulips for winter. Sit still and know I am okay. I closed the notebook and smiled. Not everything needed fixing. Not every wound required a bandage. Some just needed air, sun, and time. And as the peonies began to fold for the night, their petals heavy with summer dusk, I whispered to no one and everyone, "I'm still here, still blooming." I remember the first cold morning of fall in Greenville, the crispness in the air that snapped me awake before the alarm. The maple leaves had begun their quiet transformation, turning golden and red, then floating down like stamps from an old letter, each one carrying its own story. I stood on my porch, wrapped in the old quilt my mother made, feeling for the first time in years a sense of completion, not just survival. It was during that morning stillness that I realized how far I'd come. The girl who once believed her worth was defined by how well her soup tasted or how silently she suffered. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own name again. That same day, a letter arrived in fine stationery. No return address. Inside, a note written in careful, unsteady handwriting. "Dear Mother, I want you to know I'm safe. I'm listening now. Your words in that community talk, I hear them. I'm working on becoming someone you could once be proud of. I don't expect anything. One day, maybe, I'll tell you the rest. For now, peace." And then a small pressed peony petal, yellowed by time. I held it in my hand and didn't feel anger. I felt the weight of what forgiveness meant, not forgetting, not condoning, but simply releasing. A few weeks later, I invited Ruthie and Lila over to celebrate. Nothing grand, just 3 women, laughter spilling across a kitchen table where buttered toast cooled beside mugs of tea. I told them about the letter while I buttered slices of pumpkin bread. Ruthie smiled in that way she does, eyes soft, knowing. "That petal's been waiting for you," she said. By mid-October, I found myself stepping onto another familiar stage, the local community center this time. Not to speak about pain, but to teach something new. I'd started a weekly memoir writing workshop. It was open to anyone who wanted to put their story on a page. That day, I stood in front of a group slightly younger than me, trembling with anticipation. I began simply, "Every life is a poem in progress. You don't need permission to write it." And we did. By candlelight and over warm mugs of cider, we wrote, children leaving home, moments of quiet heartbreak, the feeling of first snow, the sting of losing someone you loved. I shared part of mine, the ache of betrayal, and the small peace I found in planting peonies and picking up my voice again. Some of them cried, some of them laughed, all of them stayed, mid-sentence, mid-heartache, mid-healing. One young woman came after the class. She said, "Your story gave the words I didn't know I had," and when I didn't know what to say, she squeezed my hand. That evening, a light rain began to fall. The peonies were gone, but their petals lay scattered on the walkway, turned to compost for the next season. I closed the door and watched dusk settle in. I thought of the letter's petal, how a small fragment of a flower could hold a promise. And I realized that sometimes healing blooms not in grand gestures, but in small kindnesses, words, petals, lived memories. By November, I found myself busy in unexpected ways. I hosted a small Thanksgiving dinner and invited the women from my memoir class, 9 of us, each bringing something not just to eat, but to share. We sat around my dining table, passing dishes and stories alike. Someone asked if I would consider writing a book. I laughed, half in disbelief, but something in me stirred. "Maybe," I said. And for the first time in a long time, the idea felt exciting, not frightening. On the weekend of Thanksgiving, I cleaned the attic and found the box with Grant's letter yellowed and fragile. I took it out, added it to a scrapbook I was making, alongside clippings from my community talk, a photo from the retreat, and that pressed petal. I wasn't sure if I'd ever share it. Maybe I would someday in that memoir. Maybe I would lay bare the paths of pain and peace for someone else who needed both. Winter arrived softly. Snow dusted the garden in quiet flurries, and I watched from inside, sipping hot cocoa. The branches outside were bare-cracked, waiting, but I knew they were only resting. Because every bud that I had planted, every story I had told, every step I had taken that was life, waiting to bloom again. At 60-something, I did not feel old. I felt like a story still unfolding, and there would be pages yet to write. Winter had curled into my bones by the time mid-December arrived. The garden lay quiet beneath frost-kissed peonies, their petals long since faded, but roots still pulsing underground. I stood at my kitchen window wrapped in my quilt, watching the first fragile snowflakes drift down. It felt like nature knew. Endings can be beautiful, too. It was on that quiet morning that I realized I truly belonged to my own story. Not the story of surviving, but of living in full, abundant, courageous bloom. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was the prison chaplain. "Your son has been released," he said softly, and asked for my number, not yours. "He's getting help and knows it's too soon to reach out." I closed my eyes. On one hand, there was relief. No more waiting for a knock that might never come. On the other, there was a gentle sadness of wounds still raw, of the long journey we'd all traveled. "Thank you for letting me know," I said simply. In the days that followed, I prepared for Christmas differently. I made ginger cookies and decked the house with holly and soft lights. I invited Ruthie and Lila for a simple dinner. We sat around the fire, sipped eggnog, spiked with a dash of brandy, and sang old carols, slightly off-key. When my small pine tree caught fire in one spot because I forgot to water it, Lila laughed so hard she nearly cried. And that laughter, more than any decoration or gift, felt like grace. On Christmas morning, I stood in my living room next to my decorated tree. Sunlight slanted through the window. Dust, finest dust motes dancing. I placed a small wrapped box under the tree. Inside, a pressed peony petal from the retreat, mounted in a thin frame. A reminder of how light can grow through cracks. A week later, I mailed a card to Grant. Not legal, not demanding, just a short note. "Your mother is learning to bloom again. We don't have to stand in the same garden, but I still hope we will one day share a window." I wasn't sure if he'd get it. I wasn't sure if he'd respond. But I understood now something important. Healing doesn't always circle back to where things began. Sometimes it steadies us so we can face forward with peace. The coming spring would bring more peonies. I planned to plant more varieties, yellow for new beginnings, white for remembrance, pink for compassion. I'd let them grow in patches, not perfect rows, just as life blooms in its incongruent beauty. This was my final page, no, not an ending, but a hinge, a point where past pain met present peace and future promise found footing. If the story continued, it did so on my terms. Soft, radiant, rooted beyond fear. I stepped outside, the air crisp on my cheeks, and breathed into the stillness. Because now I knew. I was home. What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter a new story is coming, even deeper, even more moving, and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.